This is Tarheel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
Today's show focuses on an extraordinary American who called North Carolina home. Pauli Murray was the first African American to earn a doctoral degree in law from Yale University, and she co-founded the National Organization for Women, or NOW, the largest women's rights organization in the country. Pauli Murray was also a writer, poet, pioneering activist, and the first African American to be ordained as an Episcopal priest, first African American woman to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. Now, in honor of her legacy and the lessons continuing to be learned by it, a project called the Pauli Murray Project has been created. And here to tell us more about this project and the woman behind it all is Barbara Lau, director of the Pauli Murray Project. Barbara, welcome to Tarheel Talk.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Now, before we talk about the Pauli Murray Project, I want to first give our viewers a better understanding of exactly who Pauli Murray was as a person. Because when you think about African American history and really American history in general, Pauli Murray, that name is not as widely known as some others that might come to mind. Let's talk a little bit about who she was, because she really was an extraordinary and pioneering woman.
Absolutely. In fact, historian Susan Ware, who edited Notable American Women of the 20th Century, talks about how when looking at that period of history, all roads lead to Pauli Murray, because she was involved in so many different human rights advocacy efforts. She was born actually in Baltimore, Maryland, and came to Durham, North Carolina, when she was 3 years old. Unfortunately, her mother passed away, and with 6 children, it was very difficult for her father and his family to raise the kids. So her Aunt Pauline, who she was named for, who was a school teacher in Durham Public Schools for 50 years or longer, went to Baltimore and asked her, did she want to come back here? And she said, yes, she did. So she really grew up raised by her Aunt Pauline and her grandparents, Robert and Cornelia Fitzgerald. Now, Fitzgerald is a very important family in Durham history. Her grandfather came south from Pennsylvania to help educate newly freed African Americans, and he invited his whole family to come down, and his brother Richard was a very successful businessman. Many of the warehouses, the cotton mills across Durham are built of Fitzgerald brick, and in fact the very first contract that he and his brother got was to build the original Raleigh prison. So really? Interestingly enough, they were very successful, and Richard went on to become the first president of Mechanics and Farmers Bank. So Pauli Murray grew up in this environment where, on the one hand, she had all these relatives who were teachers, and on the other hand, relatives who were farmers and businessmen. So she really got a sense of the potential that North Carolina had for African Americans in the late 1800s. And she was very influenced by those strong personalities to become a real fighter for who she was going to become. She tells stories in her book, Proud Shoes, about how her aunt would let her wear whatever she wanted, except to church. She had this one crazy hat that she wore all the time, but it's like you could wear it any time, but not to church. But she was really, began to take in what it meant to be a strong woman, what it meant to be an educator, why fighting for your rights was so important. She went to Hillside High School, graduated in 1926, was actually offered a full scholarship to Wilberforce, but did not want to attend a segregated institution. She had this crazy idea of going to New York City and going to Columbia, only to find out when she arrived that they didn't accept women. So then they directed her toward Barnard, and then the folks at Barnard directed her toward Hunter. And she actually had to complete another year of high school in New York in order to be able to go to Hunter. But went on from there, became a lawyer, was an amazing writer. Just really, I think if she'd had her choice, would have been a writer all her life, but was moved by some work that she did in the 1920s with a death penalty case in Virginia, a sharecropper who was sent to the gallows, as they say, for killing the man who owned the land he farmed, and really took that to heart and became a lawyer, and then came back, tried to go to graduate school actually at UNC in 1938, was refused, of course, because she was African American. But as she said at that point, one woman and a typewriter becomes a movement.
Exactly, because she did not take that rejection lightly. She took her concerns all the way to the White House.
Oh, absolutely. She actually, a couple weeks before that, Franklin Roosevelt had been visiting North Carolina and extolling the virtues of the university and what a progressive institution it was. And she was so angry then when she, on the heels of his visit, received this rejection letter. She fired off a letter to him and copied it to his wife saying, well, how can you call that progressive? If you were progressive, as she said, if you want to study race relations, how can you do that without the races?
Right.
But Eleanor Roosevelt wrote her back, and they actually became lifelong friends.
That was such a neat story to hear how that experience, her experience by being rejected from UNC Chapel Hill's law school, really led to a lifelong friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt.
In fact, when she did graduate from Howard Law School at the top of her class, one of the biggest bouquets she received, wrapped in purple ribbon, came from Eleanor Roosevelt. She went on, she wanted to do graduate work after graduating from law school at Harvard. Of course, they didn't accept her because they didn't accept women. So she went to California, to the University of California, Berkeley, and graduated from their law school, and then became the first African-American woman who was an assistant attorney general in California. She constantly in her life, you know, we think about her as being someone who was very much ahead of her time, you know. When you think about UNC 1938, the first person to graduate from their law school was Floyd McKusick in 1952, I believe, but much later. So she was always kind of breaking the ground, but that's, you get beat up a lot when you're in that, you know, at the tip of that kind of iceberg.
But she was very persistent and determined and really accomplished a lot during a time when she was faced with double discrimination. Being an African American and being a woman, she really had to fight that much harder.
Well, she coined the term Jane Crow to really describe that, to really force people to think about that, as you say, that layered set of discrimination, and really pushed against the civil rights movement, asking why were there no women speaking on the dais during the 1963 march? Why weren't women given more prominent positions when everybody knew that they were the backbone of the movement?
Now, Pauli Murray was of mixed race, African American, white, and Native American.
That's right.
How did that impact her life and her life's work?
Well, you know, as an example, later on in her life, she was a professor at Brandeis. And this was in the late 60s when the Black Power movement was very popular. And she really held on to calling herself a Negro, in part because she had to capitalize Negro, but also because that was a way that she thought about herself. And people really were upset with her and said, why don't you call yourself black? And she said, because I'm not just black. You know, one of the things that is so important about her and her legacy is that she really was about accepting all the pieces of herself, whether it was her white ancestors, some of whom owned some of her African American ancestors, whether it was, you know, her being female, all sorts of things. She really wanted to be able to have all the pieces of herself there all the time. An idea that I think we're only just beginning to really embrace in a way. You know, she just was very visionary in that way.
Absolutely, and when it comes to religion and spirituality, she was also visionary. Here we're looking at a photograph of her.
At St. Ambrose in Raleigh, actually. She, because of some personal experiences where she felt that it was very important to be able to minister to people, I think, and later in her life, in her 60s, she really felt that calling. And again, she was at Brandeis in a tenured position, left it to get yet another degree in a denomination that at that point did not ordain women, so quite a risk taker. But someone who always followed her calling, followed her heart, and was very pleased when that finally the General Convention of the Episcopal Church allowed women to be ordained, and was ordained at the National Cathedral with this first group of 5 women.
Quite an accomplishment, truly an amazing woman. We're going to take a break and we'll talk more in just a minute.
Great.
We'll continue a look at the life and legacy of Pauli Murray after these messages. We're talking today about the life and legacy of Durham's own Pauli Murray. She was a pioneering civil rights activist and the first African-American woman to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. With us again is Barbara Lau, director of the Pauli Murray Project, an ongoing human rights program based in Durham. Also joining us is Dr. Charmaine McKusick Melton, associate professor of mass communications at North Carolina Central University and member of the Pauli Murray Project Steering Committee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Now let's talk a little bit about the Pauli Murray Project and what it's all about. How did this program get started and what's your mission?
Well, the program started because of some work I was doing at the Center for Documentary Studies with Southwest Central Durham, which includes the neighborhood where Pauli Murray grew up. It was really important to the folks in that neighborhood that instead of just being looked at as a place where maybe everything wasn't perfect, that they really wanted to look at their assets and strengths. And one of their big assets was their history and the fact that the Fitzgerald family and Pauli Murray had been residents there. And we did a public mural project, a public art project with an artist named Brett Cook, and about 1,500 people from all across Durham helped to create 14 murals, 5 of which are about Pauli Murray.
Oh, they are incredible. I think we have some photographs of some of those murals, yeah.
And it was really exciting because Brett, who was from California, was like, why, and this is, people say this to me all the time, why don't I know about her? She was so interesting. She did so many things. Why don't I know about? So no, now we have community monuments to her. And as I was leaving that job, we really thought about how to take that mission further, how to use Pauli Murray as a way to bring people in the community together, how to tell stories like hers that are not often told, that are hidden sometimes, and how to really embrace her philosophy, which was that liberation could only be really attained by looking at the whole past. As she says, the dignity and degradation of all of my ancestors. What does that mean for us as a community? How do we also interrogate our past and look at both the things that we're most proud of that may have been easy, but also things that we struggled with. And what does that mean when we look at today's issues?
Right. And there's certainly some very important questions there that deserve that dialogue and discussion. Now, Dr. McKusick Melton, you are a member of the steering committee, but your family has some very deep roots in the Durham community as well. Your father, Mr. Floyd McKusick Sr., was very instrumental in the civil rights program, not in the civil rights movement, not just in Durham, but on the national level. And your sister helped to integrate Durham public schools. Given your family's history in the Durham community and with the civil rights movement, why is it so important for you to be a part of this project? And what are your hopes with this dialogue?
Well, I've actually known Barbara for a number of years, and we've worked on other, what I call social justice kinds of issues. So when she came to me talking about Pauli Murray, which I'd heard of, but I must admit, I wasn't as familiar as I am now.
Right, right.
And of course, I knew she grew up in Durham, but that I didn't know all the details. For me, it was about social justice issues and how we can deal with things from the past to relate to some of the issues we still have now, human rights issues and social justice issues. And certainly, a lot of times I'll talk about civil rights movement, particularly during February, Black History Month, and those kinds of things. And historical is great, but we still have issues to deal with in 2011.
Right.
And so my purpose, I think, and cause within the Pauli Murray Project is to take those lessons we've learned from her and her passion and all the things she did between helping to start NOW and the National Association to actually before my dad in '52 trying to sue Carolina. I mean, that was decades plus before. So you taking those issues from the issues of today, but dealing with some of the things of the past, and how can we use those to help us forge towards today's issues. An example of that was actually this past August of 2010, where actually I wrote an editorial, a guest columnist for the Durham Herald-Sun, primarily because, quite frankly, I was incensed with the fact that no one seemed to be acknowledging the fact that June of 2010 was the first time 2 African Americans had graduated from the previously all-white Durham High School. One of those persons was my sister, Jocelyn McKusick. The other was Larry Scurlock, both of whom are deceased. 50 years later, no one seemed to want to recognize that. I was quite perturbed, to be very honest. That's what motivated me to get on the movement of perhaps being a guest columnist. And that turned into a piece where I was not so much talking about just the history, but the struggle that those individuals first went through. I don't think, certainly young people that I teach today understand how significant a struggle those people face. Just as an example, both of my sisters were those first in 1959 in September to be the first. There were 7. One had her head pushed in a commode in the bathroom because it's one of the few places where people could gang up, and it was used. It was full of feces. Joycelyn, on the other hand, was knocked down a flight of steps, unconscious, and left. Fortunately, the only African Americans in the building were cafeteria workers and janitorial workers. One of the cafeteria workers happened to be a member of our church, happened to find her, take care of her, and move forward. But I don't think, those are just 2 little stories of the years that my other sister, Andre, and some of the others had to go through. Joycelyn, by the time she started a lawsuit in 1957 and in junior high, did not get that revealed until 1959 when she was a senior in high school. So from that editorial, I got Facebook messages, you name it, and people were quite incensed as I was. And that led into a piece of 3 projects coming together to be an open forum at the Durham Public Library with the Pauli Murray Project and another project I work on, Somebody Had to Do It, which looks for the first African Americans across this country who were the first to integrate public schools. And an open forum. I think we anticipated
70 or
maybe
people,
50 so people.
We hope.
Yeah, at 3 p.m. on a beautiful Sunday afternoon in August. We had over 100 people from age 7 to 90 plus. And when 5 o'clock came and I assumed that we would be moving on, people were still there wanting to talk. And I think one of the things we talk a lot about with Pauli Murray is just not having talking heads. But a discussion, a dialogue. And I think the dialogue is what really brings people to be moved to action about things that are happening now. So we had about 10 tables with approximately 10 people each, with a scribe at each one. We did a little bit on historical and we had a timeline, but the point was to discuss it between the various persons at the table. And it was just an exceptional experience. I don't think we ever anticipated it would be so overwhelmingly embraced by the community. In ethnic diversity, age, you name it, it was at that meeting.
And that speaks volumes about the issues that are going on today and the people in the community who want to help address these issues. I think there's something therapeutic and healing about having that open dialogue. What type of impact has the Pauli Murray Project had in Durham up to date?
Well, I think one of our goals is to lift up the life and legacy of Pauli Murray, and I think a lot more people in Durham have read Proud Shoes, know who she was, have thought about that idea of looking at the way that history can be part of social justice, the way that not dealing with history holds us back. And, you know, 4 school board members came to the dialogue in August, and I think that that will inform the way that they make decisions. We certainly hope to be part of public policy decision making and inspire people to speak up and speak out about things that were a part of their own experience, but also about things that they are not still satisfied with. I mean, Pauli Murray was such an amazing observer. The kind of work that she wrote in 1956 when she wrote Proud Shoes about her family, the observations she made then about Jim Crow, about segregation, about lack of opportunity, about the kinds of constraints that held her back as a woman of color. They're not gone. I mean, women still don't make the same money men make. You know, people still don't have the same opportunity. We're still looking at the difference, you know, the achievement gap and the difference in funding for schools that serve primarily students of color. None of that's gone away. And I think that if she were here today, she would still be speaking up about that. So when we bring forth those stories of some of the 90-year-olds and some of the people that we met through that, you know, one of the great stories that came out of that was we asked a woman to share a little bit of her story. And she came, and we as Charmaine suggested, we didn't want it to just be us listening. We wanted there to be dialogue. So we asked her to just share the nuggets, you know, some of the important things. But she was very moved by the experience and actually decided to go on to write her own story. So, you know, all of that is important, not just for her as an individual, which is, of course, where change begins, but for her to also share that with that larger community and say, you know, this kind of healing is possible. We can move on if we really deal with what happened.
All right. Well, people can find out more information about the Pauli Murray Project and how to get involved in some of these open dialogues by logging onto your website, paulymurrayproject.org. And we're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation in just a minute. We'll be back with more Tar Heel Talk after these messages. We're talking today about the Pauli Murray Project, and with us again is Barbara Lau, Director of the Pauli Murray Project, and Dr. Charmaine McKusick Melton, Associate Professor of Mass Communications at North Carolina Central University and member of the Pauli Murray Project Steering Committee. Now, we've been talking throughout the program about Pauli Murray and her work and the project and your hopes for improving the Durham community and having that open dialogue. There's also a play that has been underway now for several weeks, very successful. Tell us about the play and what that says about Pauli Murray.
Sure, the play is called To Buy the Sun, and it's a collaborative effort between the Pauli Murray Project and Hidden Voices. It was written by Lyndon Harris. It features two actresses, one who plays Pauli Murray and one who plays many, many other roles of people that were in Pauli Murray's life. But it gives us a chance to learn more about who she was as a person, what those struggles were really like. You know, how did one thing lead to another? How did one door close and another door open? And it just is an exceptional inside view, I think, of her life and her work.
And people can, of course, find out the dates that the play is still going on by logging onto the website, paulymurrayproject.org, and certainly find out more information. But there are several other projects that are coming down the pike along with the Pauli Murray Project. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect and what's underway.
Well, we're also working on a children's book, biography, and a curriculum for North Carolina school teachers for grades 3 through 5. We're planning another series of dialogues for the Durham community, and we've just been approved by the Department of Cultural Resources for a state historic marker. So we're really looking forward to installing that just a couple of blocks from Pauli Murray's childhood home, which is one of the only buildings built in the 1800s that's still standing in the west end of Durham. So eventually we'd love to be able to purchase that house and repurpose it into a community center in her honor.
We have about a minute or so left in the program. We oftentimes hear, especially when we start talking about parts of our history that were less than pleasant, to put it mildly, that the past is in the past and we need to leave it there and things aren't like that today. What is your response to people who take that perspective and that attitude?
Well, first of all, someone said to me, but we don't have segregated schools anymore. And I said, yes, we do. It's not from the same phenomena that we had in the 40s or the 50s, and that's just one example. Do we still have racism, sexism, homophobia? Yes. So we need to try to look to the past where they have been successful in making strides in the right direction. I joke in class frequently and say, why reinvent the wheel? When we already have methods in place that we know have been successful. Also, in terms of why look at the past, I mean, you know, we can go back to some quotes from Frederick Douglass and so forth, you know, the struggle, how can you move towards the future? But the reality is, Pauli Murray is an inspirational figure on so many levels, just to deal with the struggles and the turmoil of an African American woman in her time frame. And those same struggles, as we have all said, still exist. Not at the necessarily the same magnitude, but I'm an African American woman.
And so am I.
Certainly, yes, exactly. And we certainly still face some of those same concerns. So I think it's to say the past is the past and leave it there, but you cannot learn how to move towards the future without knowing what your past has been.
Absolutely. How can people get involved with the Pauli Murray Project?
Well, we'd love to have them come to our website. There's so much information there about Pauli Murray and about some of our projects. We, in the future, hope to document some more stories in Durham. We'd love some help with that. People who have stories that they feel really need to be told, we'd love to hear from them. You know, we want people to attend our programs, but we want them to be inspired by Pauli Murray, to walk in her proud shoes, to keep up her work, whether it's through us or on their own.
Absolutely. We thank you both so much for taking the time to share this wonderful information and for being our guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, send us an email at tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.